For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter.
Well, welcome back to Dunkin' Donuts, and we're excited. Craig, look who's that gentleman is in the corner there wearing that pirate hat. Who is that?
Oh, no. Is that Angelo?
It's Mr. La Quinta himself, Angelo. How you doing, Angelo?
Hey, guys, I couldn't find a Krispy Kreme in town, so
wow.
I just came here for some coffee.
Really? We had to kick your Krispy Kreme guys out of our region here. You know, Dunks is where it's at.
Have none of it.
Yeah, get out of our states.
Well, I am glad you guys walked in because while I was here to get coffee, I really don't want a donut. What I want, Russ, is my cake.
Well, Angelo, as they say, the cake is a lie. There's no cake, but we have cake donuts, which the blueberry cakes are particularly good. I recommend those.
I listened to that entire episode twice, thinking it would obligate you to a second piece of cake.
I'll tell you what, I will bring some cake.
He's metagaming your cake off.
I will bring some cake to the PAX East panel. How's that?
Curse you! I'm not going to bring the cake and eat it on my behalf.
All right, fair enough.
I will be forgiven. I will tell you that episode was worth listening to even without the cake.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it. We were very sad about the quality, but we were happy to have Rick on. That was fun.
The cake would have made it better.
I have a confession to make.
Yes.
I stopped at a shop for soft serve ice cream on my way here instead of a donut.
Oh, are you getting coffee at least?
Yeah, no, I got coffee,
right,
but for some reason, with all the blizzards and the freezing cold, I really wanted just a soft serve vanilla.
I know it.
Didn't bring us any, did you?
Nope. First day of spring yesterday. Still snowing here in New Hampshire. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, we're due for dusting to an inch again tonight.
I know. Anyway, well, all this snow in the middle of spring makes me nostalgic for my youth. See, because it used to snow a lot when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And you know what else makes me nostalgic when I think of my youth? What I think of is Dungeons and Dragons figures. So
my God.
I know. So
True.
I don't know. D&D for me, I don't know if you guys are the same way, but D&D was my first entry into any form of actual figure collecting. Is that true for you guys?
It was my first entry into figures and into games in general.
Nice.
My uncle gave my dad the box set. My dad looked at it. He's the worker type who would never think to play a game. Handed it to me, 8 years old. I get this tiny box with a die and a crayon, and the rest is history.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. What was the very first? Do you remember the very first D&D box? Was it officially branded Dungeons and Dragons figures? The ones you first got?
Mine was Ral Partha.
Yeah.
And it was the hero set, and I remember it for one reason. It had a warrior, a wizard, a dwarf, an elf. The elf, of course, was an archer. They always are.
Yeah, always.
And my piece, was the cleric. And I remember this model, the pose, the heavy armor, the shield, the mace, and at the time, it so inspired me. And I was the group's dungeon master. Clerics became my passion. I play them to this day. This model, in my youth, that was me. That piece of pewter was me.
Now, did that inspire you to paint that pewter just because to make it look the way you wanted?
Oh, I tried. I certainly tried. But we'll talk about paint. I want to hear about your first models.
Well, Craig, what was your first models?
My first models was a Grenadier monster set.
Oh, there you go.
And it was really cool. And I remember the one piece in that set that I remember the most is the snake. And it was a very normal looking snake. It wasn't a big giant monster. It was giant when you put it up against the other models, but it didn't have a base or anything. It was just a snake. And I painted it red, and I painted the inside of its mouth pink, and I painted its teeth white, and I got a little toothpick, and I painted its eyes white with little black slits in them.
Nice.
And I swear that snake has been haunting me ever since. Because I don't whenever I rearrange my game storage space, the snake pops up.
So you still find the first model. That's amazing. So you kept him.
I kept him. I kept them all, and all of them are somewhere. But that snake constantly shows up.
No, did that snake have a history? Were you a player or a dungeon master or both?
Oh, I was a dungeon master.
And how many party wipes was that snake? The enemy of your group?
No, because I was very very young at that stage, and our games were very much Monty Hall. So there was no party wipes. It was more like how many wands of Orcus can you give out in one night?
Right.
Gotcha. We went through that phase.
Yeah. I mean, and by the time the guys that I was playing with, then they moved on to computer games, and I moved on to girls, really. So
There you go.
And then when I found it again, I was much older, and so the nostalgic element of that snake is much more just the painting of it and the existence of it, rather than any sort of memories with the game. But I got a bunch of those boxes, those old Grenadier and Ral Partha boxes, and I actually, the last time I played, or not the last time because I've done a couple times since then, but one of the most recent times I played D&D was with Rafe, and I actually used one of those models as my little halfling thief character.
There you go. All these years later.
Nice.
Yep.
That's awesome.
All right, Russ, what did you bring home?
Well, I think I have to do a little backstory here. So I'm with you, Angelo. D&D was like my first real gaming game. And although we played lots of crazy board games back in the day with my parents, but and so my brother and I were really into it because, again, we moved around a lot. And one of the things, and we had all the official D&D products because really, again, this is the early 80s. There weren't a lot of hobby stores. And to make matters worse, we were stationed in Germany, which is we loved being there, but the problem was there wasn't really a hobby store you could go out and buy Dungeons & Dragons stuff. So we had, but once a year in the fall, the Dream Book, every child's dream book. This is almost like the Christmas Story. Remember the Christmas Story? They go look at the window of a store like Macy's and look at the window. Oh, when you're in the military and you're in another country and you want something, toys like all your friends in America have, the magical book was the Sears Wish Book, which they don't even make anymore. This expired in like the late 80s, but the Sears Wish Book was this giant catalog. Because back before the internet, boys and girls, there used to be a time we had to do everything by mail order. And you get this giant book, and it was all toys. It came out in the fall. It was designed for all the Christmas shopping. And they actually had, back in these days, like 4 or 5 pages of just Dungeons and Dragons stuff. They had everything. Dungeons and Dragons pajamas, Dungeons and Dragons t-shirts, all the books, the player's manual, the screens. And, of course, one year, the models came along, and they were the little sets, like you described, Angelo. They were the Ral Partha sets, and they were in the little boxes. And they were, one set was blue, and a certain set of heroes, and there was like a green set, I think, had monsters in it. Had like a white oval on the front with pictures of painted models, and the painted models inside. And what was unique about these was they weren't in blisters. You open these little boxes, and there was actually blue foam in there that separated all the little guys out, and they were all separate, so you could paint them up and put them back in there. And so we got these things just to get them because it was Dungeons & Dragons, we had to own it. And then we realized, for a while, we had been playing D&D. We had always found this need, and it's kind of funny because nowadays in 4E, everybody's like, oh, they make you use a table. But my brother and I, even at like ages 10 and 11 and 12, we were like, we want to play. We were finding we needed something to draw on to play the battles because we'd always have that situation where, you'd look across the table and one guy'd be like, I stab him with my sword. And you're like, no, you're 20 feet away. You just told me you were drawing your bow. And so you'd forget where you were relative to each other. So we started drawing things on mats and we used whiteboards and all kinds of crazy things. And then when we got miniatures, it was like a whole new world opened up. It was like, oh, wow, we can have models for all this stuff. So we started collecting all the models for the heroes and painting them. And then we used, we got paper clips and we cut up 3x5 cards and we slipped little white squares in each paper clip and lettered them all. So you'd have paper clips like A through G, and those would be your different monsters. So you'd be like, okay, Orc A attacks you, and then you have your miniatures for your guys, but all your monsters would be paper. And eventually we started collecting the monsters as well. But this is back when they're all lead, so it was expensive to buy them all up. But that's how we started. And for us, it was always a gaming aid. We started collecting them.
Wow, and your parents must have been surprised when you became an engineer. See, we didn't make that leap. The miniatures. There was this little train store in Parma, Ohio, called T&R Hobby, and I remember my parents wouldn't take me there. I'd have to get on a bike and drive both ways uphill in the rain and the snow at the same time to go in. And they sold the model cars. Remember the little rockets that you made out of a cardboard tube?
Oh, yeah.
And they had those big clunky games with all the cardboard tokens that you'd spend all night playing to take a hill with a couple of tanks.
Avalon Hill or whatever.
Avalon Hill, that's right. Bought a few of those. Yeah. But they had a little D&D section. And when we saw that little hero box, we bought it with no idea what to do. I remember I was in my book bag. I rode home. We played. So we used to set them on the end table, and all we could come up to do with them was our marching order.
Yep.
We had them. They had to represent something. And then the miniatures began driving our identity. We would stare at the model. We would argue, okay, so you have a Warhammer and scale mail armor, and we modeled our game. We didn't have the creativity to be surrogates. We had WYSIWYG right out of the box. And so we played with these guys, and it wasn't until our second box set, we've got enough money together, it was a skeleton box set. So you got the good guys, you got to get the bad guys. And it had 3 skeletons with spears and 3 skeletons with bows.
Yep.
And we brought this box set home and immediately painted them up. And of course, paint for us was the Tester's model paint.
Oh, yeah, Tester's. That's all you had, Tester's paint.
Yep. That big white brush you used to paint your model car. And Craig used the toothpicks for the eyes. We used the toothpicks for all of the detail because that brush was probably, a quarter of an inch wide and clunky.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, I didn't know about mold release, and I didn't know about priming and base coating.
Right.
It was terrible stuff that we did to those poor models. But we sat down and we had no idea what to do with them. So we found this giant roll of construction paper, and only the models finally drove us to the hill. And I remember that's when we realized I can fire my bow 4 or 5 times before they get to me.
Right.
And suddenly we realized we had no rules, and we had to figure out, I guess, going a little further, I guess that was really our first homebrew, was trying to figure out to put a timeline around a miniature game.
Yeah, like how fast movement was, because in D&D, there was nothing like that really, or very, very vague stuff in D&D 1. So what we ended up doing, this happened to us too, was that and this is before, nowadays you can go to a hobby store and you can buy the rollout mats that have grids on them and stuff, but they didn't have this back then that were dry erase or anything. So what we did was we got a giant piece of poster board, and we used rulers, and we drew out a grid on the poster board, and then we wrapped the entire poster board in a plastic wrap, okay, and this thick plastic stuff, and we duct taped the back of it, and that became the battle board. And we used because in D&D, in the old version, they gave you rules like spells, like magic missiles range 30 feet. So we said, if we make each square, 5, I think we used to use 5-foot squares. I can't remember. We picked a number. If we make each square 5 feet, I can count out, and that's how far it is. This is before they started doing that. And I think a lot of gamers did this because all of a sudden this market came out for these mats, and the market came out for more models, and we wanted monsters to match the guys. And I think some of the reason, it's funny, people keep, pick on Wizards for saying, they moved Dungeons and Dragons to be map based, but there were a lot of us who wanted it that way because you start to see how cool tactics become once you know where everybody's standing on the map, Right. And again, we weren't miniatures gamers coming to Dungeons and Dragons. We were Dungeons and Dragons players trying to make it more tactical, I guess, or more realistic, or whatever you want to call it.
We didn't get that far for a while. We played with the map a little bit, and we always loved the miniatures. And then BattleTech hit us.
Oh, there you
and
go.
We had all those hex maps. And I remember going to the public library with a piece of hex paper and blowing it up using the magnify feature because we didn't have access to to do that easily on a home computer, and making hex paper, taping it together, and kind of using BattleTech concepts to drive our D&D miniatures.
Well, that's cool.
Then it exploded. Then it got into strategy. We did take a little break and play the battle systems games, but it was more chit based. And then it became all miniatures all the time, which led us, of course, into the world of Games Workshop and beyond.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I'm so nostalgic, because Angelo, you hinted at this too, and it was your miniatures became your identity, and at that age, we all 3 of us played D&D at a very impressionable, the formative years, if you will, right? So And I was the same way. In fact, we were to the point where, remember, and again, this is a time where there wasn't tons of Dungeons and Dragons artwork. It wasn't like there were Larry Elmore collection books where you could flip through them. So you're trying to get inspiration for characters, and you're sort of starting in this world, and you don't know. I mean, you know what a paladin is because the book tells you what a paladin is, but you've never seen a paladin standing on a hill. I mean, that's like an iconic thing. Everybody's seen one of those now. But back then, there weren't 100 video games that had super powerful holy knights in them. So we wanted a picture of one. So what we'd do is we'd flip through it and we'd be like, look at that cool model. My next character is going to be that guy. So it was almost like nowadays I think of a character and I try to quest for the miniature that matches my idea. But back then it was almost like my next character idea was driven from the cool miniatures I saw, if that makes sense.
It does, because I know when I'm sitting in the old gamer folks' home and dementia's hitting and my memory is terrible, I am going to be convinced that early cleric in the heavy armor, I knew that guy.
Right, that was me.
I spent years with that guy, and we went crazy places, and we beat up dragons. I mean, there had better be some good meds when I'm that age, because I spent more time with that kid than I did with my invisible friends.
Nice. And I think also the reason, and this is why and we're going to talk about this, I get so nostalgic for any model that represents not only cool-looking heroes that remind me of characters I used to play or my friends used to play or in campaigns I was in Dungeons and Dragons, but also, like literally, I'll see a character. I used to have an elf that I played many years in my brother's campaign. His name was Lochnar, and all the time, whenever I see an elven archer a certain way, because he had a bastard sword, he had a bow, and he had a shield, round shield. And every time I see a miniature, I'm like, that's Lochnar. If he's got that combination of stuff, I'm like, that's Lochnar. And it's just always in my head. And the same thing is true with certain monsters. Like if I see a beholder or a bullet or a certain monsters from Dungeons & Dragons, it'll flash me back immediately to a time in my childhood where I first encountered that creature or first saw it played. And the nostalgia is so strong for the model, I really I want it. I'm like, I just need to have that.
Right. So Russ, who's the one, or Craig, who's the model that you said or Craig, you were saying that that snake was a model, not a monster. He wasn't the arch nemesis of your gaming group.
Right.
Was there a model that was?
No, because like I said, I never really, until I was older, like in high school and beyond, I wasn't really involved in a lot of long-term campaigns. It was a lot of me trying to get my friends to do this, and I would wrestle them all down to a one-off. And we would just basically, I would give them all kinds of treasure to bribe them to keep playing. And it was just usually just a mob of skeletons or something iconic like that.
Was there a victim of choice maybe that they loved to beat up on?
Yeah, it would be the skeletons. I had the Grenadier. I can't remember what the box was called, but it was specifically a box of mostly skeletons and then a couple other undead that I didn't have any use for because I really needed skeletons. So it was, I mean, how often are your adventures actually dictated by the models that you have?
Oh, absolutely. Right? To a point of being sad.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to have as wide a collection of models as possible, but when it comes right down to it, if you've got a bunch of skeletons, you're not going to be like, tonight we're going to fight orcs, and the role of the orcs will be played by the skeletons.
Right.
Russ, who was you? Did you have a nemesis monster?
My brother sort of did. So one of the earliest, coolest models we got the very first, I can't remember if it was Grenadier or Ralpartha, but we got the very first Tiamat model.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember it was awesome because there was a multi-headed dragon, right? It was awesome. And I remember this model very clearly. And I don't know if we ever painted it. We got it assembled. And it was around the house all the time. And I started noticing that because my brother GM'd more than I did. I GM'd, but he was more, and to this day, he still GMs for children's campaigns. They've got years and years and years campaigns running. And Tiamat always was prominent in his campaigns. And even now, he was just telling me, he always likes to tell me the backstory because I'm not in his campaigns. And even now, in his current campaigns, Tiamat is like always in the background doing something. I don't know if you associate with that figure, but I always associate. I remember seeing that on his desk all the time in his room when he was a kid, and it seems like Tiamat's always involved in his campaign somehow.
We had two. We had the villain and the victim, and you may remember this model. So when they switched over to blister packs, I don't even know if they were called blisters back in the day, there was a Minotaur model with a ring in his nose and a double bearded axe.
Oh, yes.
And,
oh, God.
and he had
that.
on armor that
Yes.
looked like leather straps with studs on it. Do you remember this guy?
I do. I remember him very distinctly now.
Yeah.
That was my first, if you want to call him large-scale model, even though by today's standards he certainly wouldn't be. And that guy was our villain. Not only not as a Minotaur, but as anything and everything. This guy got the Best Actor award as so many monsters. And then our victim, we had a ship captain model, and we named him Orion. And whenever my party had to travel anywhere, whether it was a spelljammer and they had to go into space or across the ocean, they would go to the docks. They would find a ship that just happened to be captained by a man named Orion. They would steal his ship, and then some hijinks would occur, and they never paid for passage, and Orion never managed to win, even to the point where once there was a sea-based world we created, and Orion was kind of the emperor captain, and they still messed with the guy. so the models became the centerpieces of our campaign. And to this day, we had a throwback day not too long ago. I guess it's been a few years now. We played a throwback game. And needless to say, Orion made an appearance as the captain of the starship and lost his ship to them again.
That is awesome. I did something similar to that. I had that exact same Minotaur model. He always sat on my desk in my room when I was a kid. And for some reason, I was GMing a Star Frontiers campaign, totally sci-fi. And I'm writing this one scenario up, and I decided I wanted to get them in. I wanted to do, because that Minotaur was sitting there staring at me, I did a whole module up about them getting trapped in sort of a cyber version of the maze with the Minotaur in it. It was a cyborg Minotaur, but the whole thing was based around this model just sitting there staring at me. So this whole D&D sort of thing came into a sci-fi universe. It's kind of funny. So that was now Angelo, let's be honest. So we have lots of these models. How many Dungeons and Dragons figures do you currently own?
Okay. Well, all those ones I talked about are all long gone. I have a purge and reset methodology. I have made some terrible mistakes getting rid of all my original D&D books. I played Magic when it was alpha and beta, had a gazillion cards that I traded for a high elf army that I haven't seen in years. I am not a good keeper of such things. But my daughter, my oldest daughter, was born in 2002. And the visions of a father and the things that they're going to do with these children. And in 2003, the Dungeons & Dragons miniature game came out.
Right.
21 sets of pre-painted plastic of approximately 60 models apiece.
Wow.
And the hoarding began. The countless, I would tear open boxes, dump them on the floor, pull out those little plastic bags, line them up, and just stare at the future of miniatures that my kids were going to play.
Yeah.
I got little container store linen boxes. I have them logoed by set, filled to the brim. While I've never counted, I would put the estimate at probably close to 3,000 pre-painted D&D miniatures. When the Ravenloft box came out, you know, and those are recasts of the original sculpts, not painted. I looked up the sets, went into those boxes, pulled out all of the models, and my Ravenloft box is full of pre-paints.
Nice.
I haven't done it with the others because I realized that probably wasn't necessary.
Right.
But at the time, I felt I could and I should and I did. But I have armies of elves and gobs of goblins, and I love them.
That's awesome. Now, your daughter's now 11, so she plays with you a lot then?
We went through a phase where we played a bit, and I've got the maps, and we lay them out, and they love to use the bears as pets, and we were playing some 4th edition rules, and they were quite simplified. We tried it with rules out of Descent, and enough games to wet her whistle. But my role with the children as I will expose them to my hobby, and I will let them decide what it is they want to do. And it wasn't sticking, so I eased off, and they're now into Pokemon and many other things, and Minecraft, and we've got the Hobbit now, right? And the Hobbit is very interesting, and Hobbits are cool, and they're liking that, and Smaug's not so scary. So and my son's getting older. The middle child will love it. My son is 5 now. We're getting back to a point, and I am going to twist
Try again.
I ordered some metal fairy models. And I'm going
yes.
to paint them up.
Mhm.
And this time they're going to be fairy characters with magic, and we're going to try it a little different. And I must see if I can set the hook a little better this time.
Yeah, definitely got to be careful. But I just like collecting all those dudes up. By the way, Fairy's Tale, great RPG for kids. You get to play fairies. Sparrowmen too.
Now, with miniatures, or is it all?
We did. Well, it's interesting. So we did that without miniatures. I just did it as a storytelling experience. When they were younger, I did that back when they were like 6 and 5, and they love it. And my niece and nephew love it too. Mice and Mystics, another huge hit, by the way. Good miniature.
I'm looking at that box as well, and I am going to get them back. They do game. The Star Wars X-wing game, Wings of War.
There you go.
There's some things they're really interested in. It's just whether D&D was too crunchy or it's just something missed, and I don't want to spook them.
So this is what happened with me for these miniatures. So I'm the same way as you. I wanted to collect when I see them, I want them, and I couldn't come up with a reason. I don't play enough D&D right now to really justify having a gajillion of these models. And plus, now that I'm a miniatures gamer, right? I'm like, well, if I'm going to buy this, pre-paint cast, I probably should splurge a little bit and get a really nice one, from either Warhammer Fantasy or Private Press or whatever. But my nostalgia though for like having an actual, officially licensed beholder, I just want one. So when they came out with the adventure series, the one you mentioned, Ravenloft and Wrath of Chardalon and Drizzt, I was like, I got to have those. And I like the game anyway. And it's great because it's an excuse to get the miniatures table. My oldest daughter actually really liked Ravenloft a lot. So that was a great way to get them. But now with Dungeon Command out, Dungeon Command is brilliant because, again, they're reusing these casts, as you mentioned. They've pre-painted them in Dungeon Command. And my kids actually liked my youngest, who is not such a miniature gamer because she doesn't like painting, is really digging Dungeon Command. So I don't know.
And here is a great piece of that. So if you're looking at Dungeon Command and thinking, well, I buy it for the models, they're themed. So if you want a goblin combat group to play against the fairies you're going to send your kids with, you can buy the goblin box set. I think that's is that Grum? No, it's the goblin, just Grumsh's orcs. Mm-hmm. And you can have enough goblins and creatures that go with them that it works. Right. And the models, for pre-paints, they're not bad. You get a number of them. The price point seems very reasonable. You can build a little combat group and feel good about it. I've picked up all those Dungeon Command games, and I'm enjoying them immensely.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Have you got your daughters to try that yet, or your daughter to try that yet?
We have, and I also played it with another 8-year-old, a friend of mine's son, and they like it without the combat cards. Okay. Right? Keep it simple and just play the straight skills on the creature. Use the escalation system, grab the treasure, and kind of keep it light and crunchy and very predictable.
Yeah, see, my daughters
they get out tactics.
Yeah, they like it too because again the Pokemon thing, right? They like Pokemon. So as soon as I gave them that, my youngest, who is 9, she looked at it and she goes, "Okay, so where's the summoning cost?" She's like, "I got it all figured out because of Pokemon." I'm like, "Okay, well, yeah, you can do this, this, and this." And she's like, "Boom!" So they were right into it. Really made the connection well with the Pokemon thing. So I thought since your oldest likes Pokemon, maybe you could slide that back in there.
Yeah, that one works, and maybe that's the angle is to twist that from this game into a cave with fairies. Oh, look, you found the fairies, and suddenly it turns into a 4E adventure out of the box and see if it's sticky.
So you're bringing it all together, the whole homebrew game design, because the arch nemesis of fairies is in fact goblins. Every book. So you might as well grab the goblin set.
Insidious attempt to trick his children into playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Exactly right.
And I will make a prediction for your next prediction episode. Your son is 14 months now, 15 months. How old is he?
2.5 years.
Oh my gosh, where has the time gone? I was that was the worst guess ever. Okay. So you're probably 5 years away from trying to miserably trick him into loving something.
Absolutely. Oh, I do it every day. I mean, 5 years away. I think it's an important part of parenting.
Right.
And my wife encourages it because when it works, they all come sit up in my game room and she gets quiet mommy time.
Yes, indeed.
There you go. See?
Pirate Legos gained her more quiet evening. That little Lego ship game gained her more quiet evenings than anything else I've ever done as a dad.
Yeah, my No, Horde's been a great success with my oldest. And I'm still, my youngest seems like Dungeon Command, but she pops around a little bit still. Doesn't get big attention.
I finally picked up a Horde starter box. I took a spin at War Machine a few years ago, and I didn't love the steamy, clunky rivets.
Yep.
But the Horde models called out to me, and I picked up a box set of Legions, which you heard earlier when I talked about in the modeling section.
There you go.
Uh-huh.
So see, we're all here talking about miniatures because of all these initial D&D figures that got us started in loving miniatures. Craig, what's your D&D figure collection like now? Do you still have all your originals plus more? Or?
No, well, no, I have all those really, really old ones, and they're scattered throughout all my different storage areas. And then I really didn't like any of those, the Drist and any of those board games, so I never really bought those. But I gotta say that in playing Dungeon Command in preparation for the review, I'm kind of digging it, and I might have a couple auctions I'm watching right now.
There you go. We'll have to save that for next episode.
I still don't like them. The pre-paints are really not, in my opinion, they're not good quality pre-paints. They're way better examples of the pre-painting art than the Dungeons and Dragons ones.
Yep.
But they're pre-painted.
Well, as my youngest daughter said, Daddy, if you didn't like how these are painted, you could paint them yourself.
Add them to the collection. Right. I'm going to bask for a moment in the poetic irony of what you just heard. I hate to use the word victimized, but I'm going to go with it. I have been victimized by the D6 generation into buying countless games over the years due to the news and reviews. And I feel so good that reviewing the Dungeon Command game turned the tables and is sending Craig out to experience what we, the listeners, experience every 2 weeks.
Oh, please. We get these games that we review.
Right.
It is a gift.
Very few people out there, and you may well be one of them, who spent more money than we have on games that we're reviewing. But I admit that you're probably one of those few people that has spent.
Yes. Yeah, we do spend a lot of money on games, which is probably what we spent so much money on games, we should write a podcast about this stuff. That's pretty much how that went.
We should. At least then we've got a reason.
Right. We can justify it somehow.
Yeah.
Well, Angelo, thank you so much for joining us here in Dunkin' Donuts to talk about and wax nostalgic about D&D figures.
Yeah, it's I am. My mind is churning. I think this weekend will be a weekend of trying again and seeing if the kids are ready.
Yeah, you should do it. I'm going to do it. I'm ready for more Dungeon Command with the youngest again. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Well, thanks again. And Craig, the guy's giving us the evil eye over there. You want to stop at 20 or something so he stops trying to push out the door?
No, I need to go get another ice cream cone.
All right.
And I'm going to grab a coffee to go and whine about my cake.
Yeah, there's no cake.
Sorry, we don't do cake.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.
Your dungeon master has placed you in a dreadfully precarious position. You're playing the most phenomenal game ever created. Your skin grows cold from your first glimpse of the enormous beast. It's a product of your imagination. Survival depends on a quick, decisive move. Your choices are limited. Stand and fight, or run. Use your lightning bolt. Victory is yours.
Win the treasure.
TSR Hobbies, Dungeons & Dragons games. Products of your imagination.